Caledonian Elixir. Live from Glasgow, Scotland, welcome to the Caledonian Elixir. I'm your host, Vincent, and we are doing something different today. And as the world is seemingly plunged into global conflict, we have an amazing debate show ahead discussing that issue with a panel of guests. First, though, we are live on YouTube, Twitter X, and Facebook, and also as a podcast on Spotify later. So don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button wherever you find us. It does help the show, and do appreciate it. So welcome back. And as I was saying, you've probably noticed the world has been plunged into an existential crisis. We have war continuing in the European theatre between Russia and Ukraine. And in the Middle East, too, as a result of the US Israeli attack on Iran. And with this, we see global energy markets shaking, commodities rising like fertilizer, thousands killed, millions displaced, and war and conflict spilling over the entire Middle East with no apparent end in sight. So, to basically answer the questions as to why this has happened and where's it all going, are my panel of guests. First joining us is Jim Jatras. He is a former US diplomat and policy advisor for Republican Senate leadership. Hi, Jim. How you doing?
Howdy, Vincent. I'm glad to be with you again. Especially glad to hear your accent. It's always a treat.
God be with you, and it's good to see that beard again. And next joining us is Alan Paul Roberts. He is the author of The Globalist Plan to Destroy Everything. He's a speaker and podcaster too. Hi, Paul. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Vincent. Hope you're doing well too. Glad to be here.
It's good to have you back. And next is Nicolas Gonzales. He is the host of the American Anchor Baby and engineer for the Jesse Lee Pearson Show. How are you doing, Nick?
Pleasure, Vincent. Thanks for the invite. It's Nick, and it's also known as the American Anchor Baby. A pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And lastly, joining us from California off the grid is Benjamin Balderson. He is, I guess, we could describe him as a constitutionalist who speaks out against government overreach. And again, he's got his own YouTube channel. How you doing, Benjamin?
Fantastic. Glad to be back on with you and looking forward to hearing from these other gentlemen. I'm pretty sure I know Alan Roberts.
So how I would like to start this is basically ask each of you a question, have you answer individually, and then open it up to an informal discussion. So, Jim, I'd like to start with you. How did we go from negotiations between Iran and the US and Oman 4 weeks ago to all-out war now?
Well, the short answer is we didn't go from negotiations. There never were any negotiations. Those are simply a sham, a deception to set Iran up for an attack. In terms of the big picture, since 1991, when the first Cold War with the Soviet Union ended, the United States has embarked upon a program of global domination where no other power has any legitimate interests that we do not allow them to have. That primarily means bringing down the Russians, Chinese, and the Iranians. This is the next step in that program, since the one in Ukraine to bring down the Russians has not succeeded so far. Everything else is window dressing, and it doesn't really matter whether it's Trump or Kamala Harris or Joe Biden in the White House. The program remains the same. Trump just adds his own little personal touch of crazy to the whole process.
Paul, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm not quite that black-pilled, but I understand people who feel that way. I think that it's tempting to see things in terms of good guy, bad guy, right, left, hopeless, not hopeless. And people have so many theories. And I think the reality is there's a lot we don't know. And so we're trying to fill in the gaps with our own, our own common sense and trying to grasp that information. For my part, I don't see Trump as black and white like so many people do, like most people do. You either hate him or some people like him. Um, I see him as someone who was trying to bring peace. He certainly was trying to bring peace in Ukraine. He was trying to stay the hand of the globalists who have been trying desperately to create war with Russia, to break Russia into 5 or 6 different regions, as they've been doing for decades, working on that. Hillary Clinton was going in that direction. It was obvious. Biden was going in that direction. NATO, I think, has lost their mind, thinking that they can overpower Russia. It's not going to happen. But I see Trump as someone who is trying to do what he thinks is best for America, and he's been side railed by bad advisors who are trying to take him into a war that can't be won, into another endless war that will destroy the country and destroy the world. I was on a recent podcast, and we were talking about what we call this Trump paradox. On one hand, he does a lot of good things. I mean, I had a list of like 10 or 11 things that he did that are totally anti-globalist, 180 degrees. And yet he gets into the globalist hot war in Iran, which, is totally a globalist move, I think. Unless there's some outside chance that he actually thinks that we can put down that power and bring peace to the Middle East. But, I was shocked, disappointed, and I don't see it. I don't see this working out well. I hope I'm wrong.
Yeah, we had that discussion regarding globalism and Trump's role within that globalist rubric, if he was a globalist or not. And I think I argued at the time, I thought he was. He's just a cheerleader and advocate for American-dominated globalism, whether you approve of that or not. It's no, But Nick, I know your colleague James Hake. He's been on the show a couple of times, and I'm quite familiar with his position on this. What do you think about the war and why it begun?
Well, your question initially was, how do we get from discussions to this war? And I don't know if I share the same view of like empty peace talks, because I just see Trump as a little bit different. Trump is pretty much always shown that he's a man of peace. He attempts to bring that forth, and I know he does it through strength. It may not always look that way, but that's how I see him. And I know that the world is an angry place, and I, for one, I'm glad that Trump is in the position he's in, because he's the man for the job. I mean, he's been tested, and he's a realist about these things. I've heard the criticisms, but I think many are fair, and I don't necessarily support or don't support the war. But the things that I have learned these weeks is that everyone agrees that Iran's like a problem. And so when you ask, how do we get to these negotiations to where we are now, essentially, Trump has seen that it's an issue that he thinks he could deal with. I just believe that he thought he could deal with it. I still think he believes he can. And he's just different than what the criticism is of the average establishment, out of touch elite. I think he's shown that he has creative ways to deal with things. I mean, he just has a creative way of dealing with things, and it's just not over. It's just not over, and we're waiting to see how he deals with it. That's how I feel about it. I think he's the man for the job, and it's just not over.
I thought he really advocated for peace too, especially when he was running again. However, I believe that's 9 nation states he's attacked since he's been re-elected as president. It's hard to call yourself a peace president when you're attacking countries across the globe. Balderson, what do you think?
I think financially, since 2020, I mean, we were already in the gutter before that. Since 2020, it's just been sped up. I don't know that we had much of a choice if we're gonna try and hang on to the dollar. In order, I don't know that there was much of a choice left in this. The too many other countries are starting to trade and not in the U.S. dollar. That sacred pact, which has kept us where we allow anything with Saudi Arabia and the other countries over there to basically do whatever they want because they're propping up the value of the dollar and by only trading in the dollar. And now that that's starting to diversify, and especially with Russia being such a leader over in Europe and whatnot for providing energy, the dollar's power is absolutely dying. Not that it wasn't already on the way. And I think to prop this had to happen. This is something that they've known for a very long time. In 2003, you had Wesley Clark out listing 7 Muslim nations that we were going to take over. And they were not part of the World Bank, which trades in this system. We're just seeing the end phases of that.
Mhm. And I think that one of the conditions Iran has given for passage through the Strait of Hormuz is to buy in the yuan. Is that right, Jim?
Mhm.
You said what about the yuan? Paul, you cut out there, Vince. Apologies.
Is to buy oil, purchase oil in the Chinese currency, the yuan. That's I'm sure that was one of the stipulations the Iranians have set for passage through the Strait of Hormuz, so that
Mhm.
nations that are purchasing oil using the dollar will not be permitted. So I see some divergence between the panel on this. So again, for me, it's hard for Trump to take the position that he's a peace president, that he's advocating for peace, when he's just bombing countries from the Horn of Africa to the Middle East, doing what he did in Venezuela. And there may be some grand strategy behind it, and I have to admire the decapitation strike on Maduro. You know, he ended that quite promptly and quite successfully. But this situation with Iran is a complete mess. And so I don't see how someone could argue that it's not. What do you think, Paul?
Yeah,
Why do you
well, I agree
Yeah.
that it's a mess. If you saw Marco Rubio's explanation of how we got into this, it's obvious that Israel triggered it. And according to what Rubio said, Israel made the first move, and we had to jump in because Iran would attack all our bases. And he said to the reporters, and if we didn't jump in first, and you know, because of what Israel did, then you'd be here questioning me and why we didn't defend all our bases. So it looks to me like Trump really didn't want to move yet. I personally think he brought in all that force as a negotiating tool, and that he really didn't want the actual war. But Israel jumped and forced his hand. That's I can't prove that, but it sure sounds like it based on what Rubio said. That Israel, you know, jumped in, and you know there was that opportunity where they took out, you know, the whole upper layer of Iran's government in one meeting, and here we are off to the races. I think Trump was trying to bring in all that force as a bargaining chip. I mean, he always tries to negotiate first. And I mean, he has been negotiating and negotiating for the end of the war in Ukraine. He did help end about 8 other conflicts prior to that. So we have to look at the whole picture and say, how can it be one way here in these other times? And how can he have a history of trying to bring peace and working hard? I don't see anybody who's worked in NATO to try to end this war in Ukraine with Russia like Trump has and his team has. So how do you square that reality of somebody working really hard for peace? Um, you know, you have to look at the whole grand plan, and that document that came out with in December that laid out the plan, which is to basically get control of the hemisphere that the U.S. is in and bring it into all the drugs. And that was why they went after Maduro. And that's probably why they're going to go after Cuba, is to completely end it. and end the drug trade. I mean, we have had 100,000 Americans die from fentanyl a year in this country. And this is like 2 Vietnam Wars in 1 year are the kind of people we've lost. And so somebody has to end this. This is a direct attack on America, and it's killing us. And so it's got to end. So, you know, I think where he stands apart is that he has the courage to do things that people wouldn't normally have the courage to do and to take the hit. And I think that makes him in some ways good, in some ways really dangerous, you know, because he will act. He's not afraid to act.
Nick, you looked like you wanted to say something.
Alan, would you say, I mean, I was just listening, I was just hearing you out. Would you agree that because you were describing his track record with the other wars. Yeah. Would you agree he's generally a peace president?
I think so. His first move is always try to negotiate peace. Yes.
But
he's not afraid to pull the trigger. A lot of people forget that right from the start, 2016, he was saying many times, probably dozens, maybe hundreds, that Iran must never be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. Because can anybody name another country in the world that says death to another country? I mean, that leadership is off the hook nuts. And you don't know what they're going to do. And he said for a long time, they can't be allowed to have it. Now, I think he was trying to negotiate an end to it, you know, to get them to back down through the threat of force. Again, I think Israel jumped in and forced his hand. That's my theory.
I mean, I can't think of another country that we've spent 50, 60, 70 years completely destroying, overthrowing their governments, embargoing, stealing their money. We've given them just a few reasons to dislike us. Sure. Just a couple.
Absolutely.
Say those guys hate us. Look at those guys. They hate us. Don't know why.
Well, not just hate, but say death to. I mean, they're whipping up their whole, you know, a portion of their society.
If another country done that to us, we would say the same. In fact, we say it without even them having done things to us. We do that.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any country we said death to them. If there is, I would like to know that.
Well, the North Koreans say that too, but they actually have a nuclear weapon, so we give them respect and leave them alone. Look, I'm not a Trump hater. Back in 2016 when he first ran, most of my regular Republican friends were appalled at the idea of either one, Ted Cruz or Marco Rubio or somebody. And I was a Trump man because he promised the old Pat Buchanan promises of no more wars, do something about immigration, do something about our trade. And of course, when he came into his first term, it was pretty much chaos. It was probably the most inept administration I've ever seen. And I've been in and around the Washington policy apparatus for some 30 years. So I know how these things work. I didn't want to believe it, but whatever his personal proclivities are pretty much irrelevant. Nothing in Washington changes. In Washington, both parties, it's got a striking similarity to the big dumb dinosaur of the late Soviet system. It simply cannot change course. It just does what it does. And that's where we are now. And look, to tell the truth, I don't even think it's really about Trump that much. I mean, the Democrats want to say, oh, it's because he's crazy and all that, and maybe he is, but that's not really what the problem is. And I have to respectfully disagree with Alan. He has not been negotiating in good faith to end the war in Ukraine. I wrote a paper in December of 2024 saying in so many words, what he will try to do is sell the Russians on a kind of a Minsk-free type agreement. He comes in, I want a ceasefire, so that they can basically get a timeout because the Russians are winning and build Ukraine back up into a fourth NATO army, since the Russians have already destroyed 3 NATO armies. He's totally lying about solving 8 wars. Kosovo and Serbia, nothing to solve there. He had nothing to do with India and Pakistan. I mean, I'm surprised he hasn't claimed 18 wars that he solved. I mean, the direction of American policy has not changed at all under Trump. You look at the strategy document of December 2025, where everybody says, oh, we're going to pull away from Europe. We're going to accept spheres of influence. No, we're not. All we're doing is reconsolidating our base in the Western hemisphere to more effectively project power to dominate the rest of the world, to be the global hegemon. That policy has not changed since the early 1990s, when we thought we had no more peer competitors. Now we do have peer competitors. We can't take them all at the same time. So we try to destroy them one after another. First the Russians, that didn't work out. So now we're trying to destroy the Iranians. Has nothing to do with nuclear weapons, nothing to do with their missile capabilities, none of which can do anything to the United States. It's simply a pretext to destroy a regime that refuses to bend the knee to Washington. It's as simple as that.
Your feed, Vincent. I hate to interrupt Jim because he is freaking throwing down fire over here, but your feed.
Yeah, I have noticed the feed as it's not great, but there is nothing I can do about that at the moment. That may have been responsible for the problem before the show started. However, I'm just going to have to let it.
I'll just repeat all that again, then. Okay.
I think
I heard it. I heard it.
I heard you absolutely fine, Jim, and I understood you. I was actually going to ask, wasn't it the United States that originally provided Iran with nuclear material in the first place? So there is a form of schizophrenia there in foreign policy to provide a country with nuclear material and then attack them for it.
I think we provided some nuclear development back under the Shah, but that was a long time ago. Their main nuclear program was actually with Russian assistance since that time. But that's a good point, though. We have a long track record of using other countries as proxies, supplying them, like, for example, Saddam Hussein, weapons of mass destruction. Well, we actually gave the guy chemical weapons to get used against the Iranians. And to address the earlier point, yeah, we've done lots of things to the Iranians. We probably killed close to 500,000 Iranians, if not more, through our support with various terrorist groups and support for the Iraqis during the Iran-Iraq war. So yeah, I don't like when some other government says death to America, but frankly, maybe that's a reason to just get out of their face and get out of their neighborhood because they have nothing to do with us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, I would like to play a clip here that's germane to what we're talking about. It's the U.S. Secretary of War.
Flying over Tehran, flying over Iran, flying over their capital, flying over the IRGC, Iranian leaders looking up and seeing only U.S. and Israeli air power every minute of every day until we decide it's over. And Iran will be able to do nothing about it. B-2s, B-52s, B-1s, Predator drones, fighters, controlling the skies, picking targets. Death and destruction from the sky all day long. We're playing for keeps. Our warfighters have maximum authorities granted personally by the president and yours.
Yeah. So, Balderson, do you think that is appropriate language to use in front of the world media by the US Secretary of War? I mean, I know language isn't what's really important when it comes to it. It's what's happening. However, I've never heard another US Secretary of Defense or War speak so bluntly about death and destruction during a conflict.
I think that he was specifically chosen for this. I don't think that the American public has no taste for war. In my entire lifetime, if somebody even whispers that they are anti-war, and even before that, like George McGovern and Hubert Humphrey, when McGovern came out and said he was sick to death of young men dying in old men's wars, and he was immediately championed. I think that is the general sentiment of the American public, and they needed this religious fervor that this man has. He has a giant Templar cross tattoo, and the war cry for the Crusades tattooed on his bicep. 2 separate tattoos. The war cry being very specific, and the Crusades were to get the temple back, and you needed that religious fervor added to this in order to get people on board at all.
What do you think, Nick?
You know, this is the Department of War, and it sounds like he's describing war. I mean, I don't trip at when you describe war. I'm not going to say that he is giddy or add more to it. War is war, and you know, there's no reason to trip over a mere description. I'll say this though, Pete. I mean, he's not Trump. He's not Trump. He's always struck me as a bit maybe loose and and untested, even like Trump. But that being said, I find it hard to see that he's really did anything terribly wrong there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Paul, it seems to me he was chosen for that very purpose because, he was a Fox News presenter. I know he was a serviceman too. However, I think he was chosen because he's good on screen. He talks, the way he acts the way Trump wants him to act. That, as I said, I have never seen a Secretary of Defense speak that way. And I believe he was chosen for that very purpose because he speaks that way. And maybe President Trump thinks it's intimidating.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of his style. I think a little humility goes a long way, and I don't see any at all there. Now, at the same time, I think what he's trying to do is be intimidating. In warfare, one of the goals is to make your enemy feel like they can't win, and so you try to intimidate. You try to have them lose heart, and I think that could be part of what he was doing there. But he also wrote a book about. Basically, if I understand it right, I haven't read the book, but I think it's about the decline of American military power and what needed to happen to return it to where it needs to be. And I think that's why he was selected, not because he was a Fox News person. I think he was selected because his philosophy was to rebuild the service, get all the DEI out of it, and turn it into a fighting machine again. And he has done that. He has done that to some extent. And I think the people were volunteering for the service in unprecedented numbers, and I think that's partly because they feel like they have a real military leader instead of who we had before him, who was an absolute joke, a DEI nightmare of the worst degree, in my opinion. And so he was turning that around. That was kind of like the turnaround between Carter and Reagan, was the turnaround, in the military. Between Biden and now Trump with Hegseth there. So I don't think it's because he's some TV personality. I really don't think that has anything to do with it.
Well,
Jim, what do you
if you're going to tell lies, I guess you better tell them as forcefully as possible so they'll seem more credible. Look, I'm one of those who believes that the 2020 election was stolen. And my question I ask myself is, why wasn't the 2024 election stolen? And that is, if the deep state has already decided that we're going to embark upon war, you're not going to fight it with a bunch of feminists, foreigners, and rainbow people. You want a bunch of true blue, good-hearted, soft-headed Christian white boys from the South and Midwest who will go die for America. And they'll follow Trump into a war like that. They won't follow Kamala Harris. So yeah, you got to get the guy with the kill, 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 sounding like the general in Mars Attacks or something like that, and that maybe that resonates with a certain crowd that just wants cheap patriotic rhetoric in place of we're flying at will over Iran, bombing any target we want to, and we've already defeated the Iranians, but they better surrender because evidently haven't been actually defeated. So which is it? I mean, back to Alan's earlier point, we tried diplomacy first. Diplomacy to what end? If the end of diplomacy is you basically have to submit to being an American satellite, the way frankly Venezuelans have pretended to do, but haven't quite done. There's nothing to negotiate about. But if you actually want them to capitulate, remember, Trump has said unconditional surrender is the only possible outcome of this war. So where does that leave us in terms of where this is going? I mean, there's nothing more you can demand of a country except unconditional surrender. So, I think a lot of this is just theater to mobilize certain sectors of the population, to support a very warlike program against the rest of the world.
Why shouldn't we seek their unconditional surrender?
Because they have nothing to do with us. They're no threat to us. Why are we in this war in the first place?
Is it zero threat, like at all?
If we're going to go around the world and attack countries because somehow they might present a 1%, 2% threat to us. I mean, look, Stalin had nuclear weapons. Mao had nuclear weapons. Kim Jong-un has nuclear weapons. We basically learned to live with that and to deter any possible threat to our country, which is in the case of Iran, is exactly zero. So why are we in this war? It has nothing to do with any threat that Iran presents to the United States.
Mm-hmm.
I find that hard to believe. You're saying zero. When you say zero, it's like they have
Zero.
no
Yes,
threat, and
zero,
there's like actually
zero,
1%.
yes.
You say
Just-
no.
just-
Why do you think they're coming
Just
across the
Saddam
southern
Hussein-
border?
Just like Saddam Hussein had zero threat in our southern border. Well, that's the other thing that Alan said about Venezuela and Cuba. The drugs are coming into the country from Mexico.
What did you mean by that,
Not
Alan?
from those
The southern
countries.
border?
And again, with
Yeah,
the pretext.
I was trying to ask a question about the number of people who have come through the southern border from 160 countries, according to the
Right.
statistics, including thousands from China, at least 5,000 from China, mostly military-age men. Do you see
Yep.
any threat from all these? And why would they be doing it if it wasn't a threat? How could there be zero threat if they're pouring in by the millions and mostly military-age men? How could that not be a threat?
Well, you talked about China and they were talking about Iran. If you want to say we need to close our border because that's a vulnerability, I absolutely agree with you. And I think Trump actually has made some progress in that regard. That's a very different thing to say we need to go over there and crush that country over there.
Yeah, I know it's a different thing, but you were saying that there's no threat. That's what I wanted to clarify. Now,
Yeah.
Pam Bondi claims that they have gotten out 4,000 Iranians since
Good.
they started their policy,
Excellent.
right? So, yeah, so I mean,
Excellent.
obviously they're here for a reason. They're not here because they like us. So I mean, this is what I mean about. I think we all have to have some humility because there's a lot we don't know. We're trying to piece together a theory from bits of information, right? But there's a lot that we don't know. And it really troubles me that there are millions of people who were intentionally brought into this country, I think, to take it down. I think by our own government, they were brought in to take it down. I did a podcast. Where Michael Yon was talking about the organized flow backed by the United States and the UN, primarily by the United States, to speed the flow of migrants into this country from Central America, from the Darien Gap, intentionally. So they're pouring in. And the other thing I just want to mention is I know the United States has this history of taking out countries in the Middle East. Trump wasn't president when that happened. I personally don't believe, and I know there's a lot of arguments that we could make with a lot of data to the contrary. I'm willing to say I could be 100% wrong, but I personally do not believe that his intent was to start a war there. I think he was trying to, because it's not consistent with anything else that he's been about, in my opinion. I think he generally does want peace. He tries to negotiate it. And he's also willing to back it with force. I just don't see it. Now that's trying to judge the man from what I perceive, watching the body language, listening to the speeches. Again, it's my interpretation. It's how I see it.
Here's why it's fair, Alan, because it's just not over. I find it very hard to argue and disagree with like the things you're bringing up, Jim, about America's history and the involvement in the quagmires. But as it stands, it's just not over. And imagine for a moment, there's a lot of talk of him just taking an off ramp and leaving. Oh, it'll look bad and all that. But if someone like you, Jim, could see this as a terrible quagmire, wouldn't you want him to take the off ramp and do those kinds of things? It's not clear that he is going to take all those terrible actions that one might think about. I think one might describe it as the deep state, or all those actions taken by the military over the years.
See, I don't want to misportray what Jim is saying, but I think a lot of what you hear from Trump or Pete Hegseth, it's like it's part of the PR, the public relations dimension of war. In other words, it's just propaganda. And I've always been skeptical of it. I remember when I was a kid, and I'm going back, and I heard of the resistance fighter Ho Chi Minh. And I don't know if any of you can recall who Ho Chi Minh was. He was
Sure.
supported by the OSS in World War II, and he was a leading resistance fighter against the Japanese occupation of Vietnam. Now, the French didn't like Ho Chi Minh because if he was successful in liberating Vietnam from Japan, the French wouldn't get Vietnam back, their former colony satrap. And as the US promised Ho Chi Minh a free democratic Vietnam, he fought the good fight and he won, and he defeated Japan with the help of OSS. But what happened is the US and France conspired together and they gave Vietnam back to the French. And then they transformed Ho Chi Minh and his army, his guerrilla army, into a bunch of evil communists. But in reality, they were fighting for democracy and independence. And from this, we get the Viet Cong. Now, that's always stuck with me because after, much later, we get the Gulf of Tonkin incident, we get WMDs in Iraq, we get that the Taliban were behind the cultivation of opium in Afghanistan. When Ahmed Karzai, the brother of the president of Afghanistan, was practically the biggest trafficker of opium in Afghanistan. So there is this PR and propaganda element, and I don't know if that's what Jim is alluding to, that although they say one thing in front of the media, it's sort of bullshit because behind it there's a bureaucracy, there's a deep state, but it's continuing the same policy regardless of the administration. Is that sort of in terms of what you're saying, Jim?
Well, look, I mean, a lot of people have 2020 rear view vision. We can look at all the mistakes we made in Vietnam, and there certainly were a number, although that was in the context of a true Cold War between two global blocs, the Soviet bloc, the American bloc. That was, you might say, a border skirmish between our two blocs. And I can understand why the U.S. took the position then that we did, although we did a really bad job of it. And by the way, Ho Chi Minh was a communist. He was a communist since the 1920s. He was involved in the founding of the French Communist Party in Paris back in the 1920s. So he wasn't just a nationalist. That having all been said, there are a lot of people today who look at what happened in Iraq 2003 and say that was a big mistake. I don't know how to say it any plainer. What is happening today in Iran with Trump and what happened in 2003 with Iraq and Bush, only difference, one letter, Q versus N. It's the same scenario, the same lies. Now, Nick is right. We don't necessarily have to go all the way in and occupy Iran because, in fact, we can't. We had the power back in 2003 to go and occupy Iraq. And even that didn't turn out very well for us. Yes, obviously, we don't have the manpower. We don't have the relative weight in the global security system to invade Iran and occupy the place, although that would be the natural consequence of saying we want unconditional surrender. So, yeah, Nick is right. If we take the exit ram and say, get out, would that be a good thing, having done a dumbass thing in the first place? Yes, I suppose it could be. On the other hand, will the Iranians let us go? I mean, now that we got our tit caught in the ringer, are they going to want to be able to say, no, you don't get out so easily. You came in and attacked us. We're going to start taking your bases down. We're going to destroy Israel. We've got demands now of our own since you've gotten into this mess. That's the position we're in now.
Well, my next question is in regards to that. So Trump recently said in a Truth Social, if Iran doesn't open the Strait of Hormuz within 48 hours, all power plants in Iran will be destroyed, starting with the largest one. Now, in the last few hours, he's sort of walked that back, saying the US is negotiating with Iran, even though the Iranians are saying that's not true. But if Trump can't keep the stretch of water, the Strait of Hormuz open, doesn't that represent a humbling of his power and also an extension, a humbling of the power of the US military?
Absolutely. And he can't keep it open. He's look, he invited all these countries and he said, we're going to send the US Navy in to escort ships through the Strait of Hormuz. You notice that hasn't happened because that would be a shooting gallery for the Iranians, and no other country is dumb enough to send their Navy in there either. That's not going to happen. So he threatens them, said 48 hours, I'm really going to start destroying everything. And then this morning, he walks it back and says, well, we've been negotiating. I'll give you 5 days before I do that. And then the Iranians immediately deny there's any negotiation going on. And frankly, I don't think there is. If you ask me what I think is going on, I think he's just trying to set them up for whatever this hair-brained expeditionary force they want to send in to try to seize Kharg Island or something like that. But that's my guess.
Benjamin, what do you think about the the fact that Trump has walked these comments back about bombing the power plant, and if he can take control of the strait, it is essentially a humbling of his power and, by extension, the power of the United States?
I think he gets caught up in his own propaganda, and I think a lot of the Senate and whatnot. If you ever watch Senate hearings, it's shocking how much news they get from TV. Like, they are also getting their news from the media, and we all need to remember that in the 2012 NDAA, that the foreign propaganda was now legalized to be used on American citizens. So, as was being explained earlier, where we put out things very similar to Julius Caesar, where, oh, we overpowered these guys so easily and things like that, and they're trying to drum up war. If you look at the YouTube world, one of the things that I'm seeing get bandied about that I haven't heard since I was a little kid is Manifest Destiny. Again, they had to put a religious fervor in this because the American public for my entire life has not wanted war. It has been unhappy with all the wars, and not a single one of them has done anything for us.
Nicolas, what do you think?
You know, there's a couple of things I was thinking as I was hearing you guys out. And Jim, you know, all I keep hearing really when you zoom out is actually multiple reasons, or reason after reason why Iran seems to be a problem, not zero problem, not a nothing problem. You're bringing up the strait, you're bringing up all these issues, and I just keep hearing more reasons why it is an issue, and it's an issue for everyone. And I love how Trump did ask the world for help in opening up the strait. You know, instantly they were like, "Oh, that was your fault. You did this." But what happened? I thought we were friends. I thought we were a global, right? A reasonable, sovereign nations. And I love on top of that is that he asked China. He goes to China. He says, essentially, you're getting, this is all your oil. Are you guys going to help us or not? And I bring that up because it's a point to this concept that there is a more reasonable world, even if they're economically competing, and then there is an insane terrorist like led nation like Iran, that even China, even our economic enemies, I think if it wasn't so expedient for them, would agree, hey, you know what, this is a problem. So I love that he's doing these things, and I just keep hearing reasons why it is an issue. And all I'm saying in reference to this unstoppable march of war that the U.S. government, it seems, doesn't matter the president. You know, the only thing I was saying about that is simply is that, you know, Trump can and still he has and can still respond to all that in a creative way, like he's done before. Like, he does have room in the executive, and I'm waiting to see how it turns out. I think he's the man for this moment.
That's why you think we pick a fight with another country and our friends have to come back it. That's like me watching my friend pick a fight with Nick Diaz and his team of friends and going, why didn't you jump in to help me? Well, why did you fucking go do that? Why does that obligate me to be a dumbass?
But that's assuming that there was peace before, and I just disagree with such a like concept to say that Trump strikes and all this. It's
Has
like
Iran ever attacked us?
If
the
I may,
mainland U.S.
The idea is that, well, there was just peace before, but that's not true. Trump is revealing what was already there. Everybody agrees with this. Everybody, even the most U.S. and Israel critical, agree. Iran's like an issue, even if they can't exactly know how they would do it. If they could, they would, though. I think the only ones who agree with Iran are like the third worldists, those who want to see the West wane. Am I getting this right? What do you guys think?
Well, Iran is a signatory to the non-proliferation treaty. Israel isn't. You know, Iran is conducting itself according to international law, as far as I can tell. I mean, I can't recall the last time Iran invaded a sovereign nation. Can you, Nick?
Well, they work through other proxies, though. Unless you don't buy that. I mean, they sponsor terrorism, financially and through other means. They're not going in themselves, but unless somebody can show me the evidence that they don't do that, I mean, they've been a problem for sure.
Where is the Shiite sponsored terrorism in the world? If you look at the vast majority of Islamic terrorism, it's Wahhabist Sunni terrorism, and the number one sponsor is the United States. We sponsored Al Qaeda in Afghanistan. We sponsored them in Kosovo, in Bosnia, in Libya, in Syria. Look, Trump met with this old
Sycamore in
White
Syria.
House, Al-Qaeda terrorist. I mean, come on, we're the biggest sponsor, not the Iranians.
Mm-hmm.
We're the ones that give everybody the weapons to do all these things and have for years. And in the funny thing about the way you put that is we do it under proxy wars.
Mm-hmm. I won't deny what you guys the topic about
Al-Jilani, the leader of Syria, that's our man, or it's the US's man, and he was the former leader of Al Qaeda.
I think the question though is we still have to separate what happened up to Trump from Trump forward. I don't deny anything about the United States doing exactly what you're saying. I think it's absolutely true.
Trump had Al-Jilani at the White House, calling him a handsome man. This is
he does that with Kim. He did that with King Jong-un. He did that. He does that with his so-called enemies. He tries to warm them up. He compliments a lot of people who you would say would be our enemies, or that he doesn't. Yeah, just because he says stuff like that doesn't mean he. That's not as few.
He's not our enemy.
All I'm saying, Jim, is that Trump hasn't changed.
The guy we put into power.
I couldn't hear that.
He's not our enemy. This is the guy we put into power.
Mm-hmm. Nicolas, you were saying something, and
I was just saying that what. I also just wanted to throw this in because they're saying, you guys are saying about how it's the U.S. The U.S. is funding some of these sides, and you know what? I'm not even denying that. But here's the thing: could you guys respond though to the topic at hand was like the issue that Iran poses? The answer to that can't be, well, look at what the U.S. is doing. Like I could agree with you on that, but are you guys saying that Iran is posing no threat, that they're not doing the terrorism, et cetera? Not the U.S. funded stuff. You guys made that clear, but what about what they're doing? Are you guys saying that they're doing?
Nick, I would respond by saying if you look at US and British involvement with CIA, MI6, Operation Ajax, putting in a new government in Iran in the 50s, providing Iran with nuclear material, we have shaped the direction of Iran for decades. You can't divorce our role in what's happening in Iran today with what we've done in the past. Iran wouldn't be the nation it is today if we didn't have the involvement we have had in the past.
Oh, so you're saying they would not be saying death to the U.S. if it wasn't for the U.S. That's what you're saying.
Yes.
If we haven't yet, we had no Mossadegh in 1953 supported the Shah those years. Look, I mean, as far as sponsoring proxies, any power will support
you, basically.
Any power will support groups they think are in their interest to support. India supports Sikh and Islamic terrorist groups in Pakistan. Pakistan supports Islamic terrorist groups in India. The Iranians support groups that are friendly to them in the region, as do the Saudis and Yemenis and everybody else. They all support people. We do that too, but you notice we do that in places where our direct interests are not involved. We are not located in the Middle East. We are the most secure of all the great powers. We have the least reason in the world to be playing these stupid, bloody games in other people's neighborhoods. I mean, you can take this to another degree. The Chinese are trying to build the Belt and Road Initiative through Eurasia, connectivity and all that stuff. Half of our policy is designed to try to scuttle that, blow it up, retard it, make it impossible for the Chinese to do. Where do we build anything? Where's our high-speed rail in this country? Where's our interconnectivity through this hemisphere? We don't do any of that stuff. We just try to wreck other people's stuff.
I love America dominating. Am I wrong for that? Like, I'd like to know why we shouldn't dominate.
We shouldn't do what?
I love America dominating. Am I wrong for that? I want to know why.
Yeah, you're wrong because what we're doing is we're substituting for building our own country, wrecking other people's countries.
I think there's a wrong way and a right way to do it.
If you have constructive stuff you're trying to do, we're going to try to ruin it because we don't want to commit the resources or the determination to build back our own country, which we've allowed to atrophy.
Would you say Venezuela was the right way or the wrong way?
It was
that?
the wrong way. We had nothing. Again, what we did with Venezuela, because it's in our neighborhood, we suborned the government there. We told Delcy Rodriguez, the president, we paid her off, and Maduro was too dumb to take a plane to Moscow before he was taken into custody. We don't actually run Venezuela. They're making the same offer that Maduro already made us to say, okay, fine, we'll play a little game with you here, but they're not really under our control right now. But again, what did we really gain from that?
Well, help me understand, because maybe I don't know. Help me understand why we should tolerate enemies back in our backyard, so to speak.
I don't think it's
the Middle East is our backyard.
Creating enemies.
No, we're talking about Venezuela right here, just briefly. Apologies.
Again, I guess, Nick, the question I keep asking, why do we keep having this attitude toward other countries that they must exist as satellites or enemies? They have to be one or the other. If they refuse to be a satellite, we will destroy them and make them a satellite. Is that how you get along with your neighbors?
Well,
I think Venezuela. I was going to say, I think Venezuela is an exception. I mean, they are, they're sponsoring drugs. They're sponsoring election theft. They're a big part of the machinery of the election system that is designed to steal elections, or part of that. And I personally think that Maduro, I think it's going to come out exactly what they've been doing with the Smartmatic and with all that technology that has been designed specifically initially for Venezuela to steal elections, but then after that to export that technology around the world, and specifically to the United States, where the 2020 election was stolen in large part thanks to that system. So I personally feel I like the fact that Venezuela has been neutered in their ability to do that and to run the drugs. And I think it's totally legitimate in that case to put an end to it. And I know it's bold, and I know it's you could say it's colonial, whatever. But I don't see that. Like, what is Venezuela today? Do you think that they think they're better off or worse off? I bet the average Venezuelan citizen says we're better off. And I personally think that would be Trump's version, is to get the country under control and then let them run themselves in a way that's not a threat to our citizenry in terms of drugs, in terms of election integrity.
Okay, Alan, I would like to play.
I noticed that we did that with Iran when we took away their democratically elected leader and got all this in exchange. I noticed that was definitely our goal.
Again, we're comparing pre-Trump to Trump. I'm not denying anything anybody's saying in the past.
An anti-war the first time around to try and get the populist decision, and he came in on his lame duck and showed his true face.
Yeah, see, that's judging someone's heart. That's judging someone's heart, and I don't think you can get inside somebody's head and know that. I mean, that's an opinion, but I don't think you can really know that.
Did Trump say that if he ever ran for president, that he would pretend to be Christian and turn to Republican because they're fools? And they would eat that shit up. Did he say that? I remember it. Everyone remembers.
I don't think he's saying that or doing it. That's an opinion.
Do you remember
he said
him
that back when he was a Democrat and friends with the Clintons?
Well, you don't think people can change? You don't think people can change? Are you the same person you were 20 years ago? Seriously, it's a serious question.
This person 20 years ago and then become.
I'm just saying we all change. If we can't change, there's no hope for anybody.
Okay, guys, Balderson, wait a minute. Balderson, wait a minute. I'd like to get your opinion.
I think this is pretty lively.
I'd like to get your opinion on this clip of Trump here at one moment.
They want very much to make a deal. We'd like to make a deal too. We're going to get together today by probably phone, because it's very hard to find a country. It's very hard for them to get out, I guess. But we'll at some point very, very soon meet. We're doing a 5-day period. We'll see how that goes. And if it goes well, we're going to end up with settling this. Otherwise, we'll just keep bombing our little hearts out.
Bombing our little hearts out. Right, I alluded to the alleged negotiations that Trump said began earlier during the weekend. Considering the last two times that the Iranians negotiated with the Americans, they were bombed and killed. Should Iran take these negotiations in good faith? I mean, are they even happening since the Iranians reject there's any such negotiation taking place. What do you think about that, Nick? Should
You
the
know, I-
Iranians take those negotiations in good faith, considering they're one of the last times the Israelis killed them during a negotiation?
Absolutely. If they're serious about making a deal, it would work out for them, in my opinion, because Trump has always tried to make a deal. He does this brinksmanship, he does this show of force, but he desires, in my opinion, to have a deal to make things work. And if you remember, the conditions of their negotiations previously centered around enriching uranium, etc. So it wasn't that you could just discuss and we can just compromise. There was non-negotiable items, and Iran simply would not budge on them. And you could say, well, that's the US's fault, but I just disagree. I just don't want them having those things. And since they did not budge on the enriched uranium, etc., that's why these things went down. That's why we went from negotiations to what's going on now. There's a lot of minutia I maybe don't necessarily agree with, but you guys know better than I. But that's how I see it. I mean, and that's why I think they should come to the negotiation table to work out for them if they're serious. Hopefully they see now that they should be serious.
Well, it's interesting that there is this push for negotiations after the Iranians launched a missile at Diego Garcia, but if I'm not mistaken, it's about 4,000 kilometers away. So they definitely have strong cards to play. Balderson, what do you think about the alleged negotiations that are taking place?
I'm with Jim on this. I think all of it's nonsense. I don't think that outside of complete capitulation there's any negotiations possible. Iran stuck with the nuclear proliferation treaty. They let the people come in and check it. It's insane the things like guys like Nick over here are saying, where it's like, well, they were doing 50 and a 55, but they might have done 60 at some time in the future. So I'm going to stop and bust them and write them a ticket. That shit's insane. They actually were abiding by the rules, and we keep not abiding by the rules and then punishing them for not breaking the rules, but maybe in the future could have broken the rules. It's insane.
Hey, you might be right about some of that. It might be fair. Here's the thing, though. It just seems like you guys don't think it's like impossible that Iran would lie. It's like, do you guys think Iran lies ever?
Sure.
I think they let the inspectors in to check it out, because that's what the inspectors were for, to verify these things.
Do you guys think that Iran lies? I just think I think it's possible. They might lie a little bit.
I know what nation state in the Middle East is lying, and it's Israel.
What? Sorry, go ahead.
Israel has a nuclear program, a nuclear weapons program, and they don't acknowledge it. That's
was that revealed? Was that just revealed, or is that just me when they hit Dimona, right, with like a ballistic missile?
Yeah,
they have nuclear facilities, or is that just like getting like
but they don't acknowledge a nuclear weapons.
Oh, gotcha.
So that's a lie of omission.
Yeah, I mean, do you think there's a single country in the world that thinks that Israel doesn't have nuclear weapons? I mean, that's got to be the worst kept secret in all of history. I mean, everybody's known that. Every nation's known that. Yeah.
And at this point, it surprises me the Iranians have not gotten a nuclear weapon yet, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if they do get one now.
Yeah.
Look, I mean, aside from, I don't necessarily put much weight in an Islamic fatwa by the old supreme leader. That was a religious decision. But by all accounts, he was the one who was saying, no, we're not going to do that, at least for the time being. His son is probably less inclined to stand by that finding. Look, we basically put countries like Iran in a position you can be North Korea or you can be Libya. After we invaded Iran, Libya said, okay, fine, we see the writing on the wall. We will get rid of our weapons programs. We'll make a deal with you. And we said, great. Now we come in, stick a bayonet up your butt and shoot you in the head. Kim Jong-un decided, yeah, I don't think I like that option. I think I'll go with option B, which is I'll actually get some nuclear weapons. If I were the Iranians, that'd be the position I'd be in now. If you're saying you don't want my nuclear weapons, you don't want me to have nuclear weapons, well, tough luck, guys, because now I'm going to get the damn things. Because you put me in a position where that's the only way I can guarantee my security, especially since the Israelis, when the chips are down, very well likely may be tempted to use their nuclear weapons if Iran gets the upper hand here. So, hey, look, I think maybe Trump is it's possibly just trying to find a way to declare victory and get out, but I'm not sure either the Israelis or the Iranians are going to allow him to do that. I don't think there's any negotiations going on. And if there are, then the Iranians really are stupid to believe a negotiation with a country that never abides by its agreements, Trump or no Trump.
Jim, you're saying you believe that? Oh, I'm sorry. Please go on.
No, I was just going. Okay, Nick, you could go, answer this too. Who did the Iranians actually negotiate with? Witkoff, Kushner?
Yeah, those two flim-flam men from New York. I mean, come on. They're the same ones they sent to talk to the Russians that, the spirit of Anchorage, and Putin thought he had a handshake with Trump, and then Trump repudiated it. I mean, they have to be fools, the Russians and the Iranians, to believe a word these two guys say.
I've read quite a few articles in Russia today, and it seemed like there was a lot of goodwill building up between Russia and the United States. If I can trust that newspaper, there were different people talking about the way things were heading in a very positive light. And it's not that they see Trump as someone they can't trust at all. I think they saw him as someone who was trying to bring peace.
Quite the contrary. You're right, absolutely. And that's where I think the Russians have tended to delude themselves. I mean, how often has Putin himself admitted that he was surprised and tricked that the Westerners did not keep their word? Whether it was the Minsk agreement at the beginning of the war, where they thought they had a deal in April 2022 in Istanbul. He thought he had a handshake agreement with Trump in Anchorage, and none of that turned out to be real. But Vladimir Putin, probably the most, if I can put it this way, naive guy in the Russian leadership, or some people think maybe corrupt guy, still wants to make a deal with the Americans, although it should be clear to anybody, and it is clear to a lot of people in Moscow, it's a complete dead end. But for some reason, he still seems stuck on talking to them, and, Trump is somebody we can do business with.
I'm pretty sure. I bet they have a lot of intel, though, that we don't have. They're probably intercepting communication all over the place. I think if he has some hope and he's trying to reach out, he's probably got a pretty good reason. That's just my hunch.
Do you know what I find real interesting? In Trump's first term, he went after Soleimani, and we saw how recently he took out Maduro, and then more recently there was the attack on the Ayatollah. But a few months ago, there was an alleged attack on Valdai against President Putin, and it's made me reconsider things, because Trump said he had no idea that this attack went forward. That it was President Putin who called him and told him of the attack. But it makes me reconsider that, because if you look at Trump's MO, he seems to like these decapitation strikes, targeting very powerful and senior figures in the military and the political apparatus. And you can't get any more senior than Vladimir Putin. What do you think of the idea that Trump was behind the attack at Valdai against Putin in December?
I don't buy it.
No,
that's too risky. That's way too risky. And I don't think he wanted to do it. I think he saw Putin as someone he could negotiate with. They seem to be trying pretty hard.
He spoke to Putin just before the attack, because if I remember correctly, Zelensky visited the White House on that day. Trump spoke to Putin first. He spoke to Zelensky, and during the meeting with Zelensky, there was the attack. Now, again, I was skeptical myself. There could be, the Ukrainians don't have the space-based infrastructure to carry out such an attack, but they do have help from, the British. Maybe there are factions within the CIA at the United States that could coordinate that kind of attack with him. But it is Trump's MO to go after senior leaders. What do you think about that, Jim?
No, I think that is what happened. For some reason, based on what I was saying earlier, there are a lot of people engaging in wishful thinking in Moscow regarding Trump. And even before that attack, you heard a lot of people saying, well, yeah, the British are bad, the Germans are bad, but the Americans, Trump, there's still a possibility there. I think almost everybody in Russia has now dropped that mirage, except possibly Putin himself. And as I said, I don't know if that's naivete or whether that's corruption. There are a lot of people in Russia who think that there are various malign influences on Putin that really do not have to do with Russia's national interest. And the military in particular is very, very frustrated with the way this war is being conducted.
Yeah, because I hear it a lot, and American media, more on right-wing media, that this is an ongoing war because we're talking about the Ukraine-Russia war. The war doesn't end because there are elements within Ukraine, such as Zelensky and Britain, and they're pushing for the war. And they say the same thing in the Middle East, that the reason there's a war with Iran now is because it's what Israel wants. But there's one commonality in all these theatres: the United States. And the United States, it's all, it's not their fault. They're not culpable. It's Israel. It's Britain. It's the Ukraine. I don't buy that. I think Trump knows and is very much involved in these attacks against Russia, Iran. I don't think Netanyahu has this mystical power that persuaded him to carry out these attacks. No, I think he was on board, and he has been on board with that project to decapitate this Iranian leadership for some time.
I think as far as NATO goes, I think NATO's very divided. I mean, you have you have France and the UK seeming to want to go to war with Russia, seeming to block lots of moves to try to settle the war in Ukraine. I see it as Trump's trying to end it, and between France and the UK, they're trying not to let it end. So I think NATO is very divided, and Trump's threatened to pull out of NATO. I don't think he'll do it, but he's threatened it, and he's threatened it for a reason, because he's frustrated with these warmongers toward Russia. I don't think Trump is in that camp when it comes to Russia.
Okay, I've got one. Right, sorry, Nicholas.
Comment on this, because that's like, if I may, the camp that I would put Trump in is that he's been very critical of the institutions of America and the history and the actions, but he doesn't want it to go away. He doesn't want those institutions, et cetera, to not win. So I don't see him as someone who wants to just do away with the whatever security apparatus the U.S. has in their view of the great rivalries, But he has big criticisms of the internal rot and corruption going on, and so he uses those problems with NATO, those problems with Ukraine and Russia as a cudgel or whatever, as a way to correct NATO and correct America. But I just don't see him as wanting to throw that all away. So
no,
that's just how I put him.
He doesn't want to throw it away, but he wants to make it more effective. Obviously, he doesn't like leaders like Starmer and Merz and Macron. He looks at them as like little Joe Biden clones, and he'd rather have little Trump clones like Viktor Orban or Robert Fico. But to have a better NATO. But the idea that he is a peacemaker, I think, is absurd. He either wants to trick the Russians into another phony Minsk agreement where we can build up another Ukrainian army to have another go at him again, or failing that, just keep the war boiling. Remember his meeting he had at the White House with Ursula von der Leyen, where we basically said we will sell unlimited weapons to the Europeans so they can give those to the Ukrainians. So basically, we'll fight to the last Ukrainian man and to the last European euro to keep this war going. And remember, Pete Hegseth said early in his administration, we simply want to transfer the burden of the war with Russia to the Europeans. That's all he's doing. There's nothing about peace in it at all.
Yeah, he's wanting to transfer the cost to the Europeans.
Yeah.
Okay, I've got one last clip to play. I'm sure you'll be familiar with this Colonel.
I would say the following. First of all, if you need medication of any kind, you better go out and buy all the medicines you can get, because in a few months they won't be available, because the petroleum industry has a big role to play in the production of pharmaceuticals. So that's my first piece of advice. And secondly, start thinking in terms of storing food and any other items that you think you may need, because as this war continues, and it's going to continue, the impact that I talked about earlier is going to be felt here. There is no evidence that anybody in Tehran is going to pop up on the phone, call President Trump and say, oh, we're so sorry, we surrender, we'll do whatever the Israelis want us to do, because that's really what it's all about. Now, we have other interests. We think we're harming China. I don't know what the Chinese will do, but I think the Chinese over the next few weeks, they're going to surprise everybody by what they may be willing to do. I don't know if the Chinese will fly some aircraft into the airspace over Iran and essentially tell us, look, we've had enough, stop, or we'll go to war. Maybe the Russians will do something similar. Who knows? There are any number of things that they could do to signal that.
There's two parts to that I find interesting. The first is the illusion that social conditions, economic conditions, are about to get a lot worse, and the idea that China could get more involved. First, Balderson, you're a pretty self-sufficient guy living off the grid. Are you concerned about the social and economic warnings that Colonel McGregor stated there?
Things like this are the reason I moved off grid. 100%. This guy is right on the nose with it. That obviously it's interesting that he took petroleum. A lot of people don't realize how heavy petroleum is in Rockefeller medicine and how heavily it's used. But then also imagine, we think prices are high on things now when we start seeing $8 and $10 fuel. All of a sudden, the shipping of these goods, and that's the big thing in this country, is we ship things from everywhere across everything, and all those prices are going to skyrocket. It's going to be so much worse than it was during 2020, and we already saw how fragile the supply chains truly are in these things. In the United States, most people, and this applies, I think, to a lot of the world, most people have left self-sufficiency and moved more toward large city living, where everything needs to be supplied to them, including their basic needs. In 1900, 90% of the country provided 80% of their food, and supermarkets weren't even a thing. Now people have 3 days worth of food. This is going to be disastrous when all of a sudden we have the overinflation of the dollar and goods become harder to transport and provide. This is going to get ugly.
Mm-hmm. Alan, what do you think?
Yeah. I mean, I agree. If it keeps going on, it will be hard for everybody. And I think other countries even more so than the U.S. Because the U.S. has a better fuel supply, more of it, within the country. Than some other countries do. But I think no matter what, it affects everything. It affects how things get here from other countries. I think the supply chain is fragile. And I think if it goes on, absolutely, it's going to be an issue. Yeah, it's an issue already. We're starting to see it with gas prices. It'll just keep getting worse if it's not resolved.
Nicolas, you're out there in California too, aren't you?
Yep.
Yeah.
Los Angeles. And I've seen that go
Mhm.
pretty high in certain areas, although not all the gas stations are like that. The most viral gas stations out here are like almost $7 or whatever. They're like in certain areas where I forget the rules or why they get to put it that high. But it has gone up. It has gone up.
I'm in Humboldt, it's literally the worst in the state where I live. Just horrifying.
I've seen it high. So yeah, but I gotta say, on that topic, the fact remains that all those things have not come to pass. I mean, of course, they're possibilities, but they just have not come to pass. And I think it also remains a fact that it was, like, for example, gas prices were high under Biden. I know that they get brought up a bunch. I really don't think it's a cope, because as it stands, why are people getting apoplectic now when things were like definitively worse before? Why not? Wouldn't you want to at least wait? At least wait until the prices were higher than Biden, then you can maybe panic. Like, all those things just haven't happened.
They also didn't happen immediately under Biden. The consequences of the actions take a little bit of time to show up, and we're just waiting for those consequences that we know are coming.
About 5 years ago, I moved to a rural property. We got chickens and eggs and fish on a river, and some crops that I grow, a lot of stored food, everything pretty much solar, a lot of ammunition. I'm about as secure as I think I can be over the short term. I've been saying for several years, this country is going to inevitably go through something similar to what the Soviet Union went through in the 1990s. It'll be connected to a crisis in our global empire of one sort or another. Maybe this is the beginning of it. Maybe it's not. Maybe it'll be much worse even than this could be. and we'll have to see. But back to what was said about the Chinese, I like the Russians. I think the Chinese will tend toward trying to find some way to de-escalate this. They still got a lot of stake in the international system the way it is, and would prefer a soft landing with the Americans, where the Americans finally take a step back and say, okay, fine, rather than pursuing global domination, we'll agree to be one of a number of great powers. It's kind of a concert of powers. We can be first among equals. Unfortunately, the United States will never agree to that. So I think the Chinese and Russians are fooling themselves. Rather, the other point of view is that they could say, well, the Americans have now got themselves wrapped around the axle in Ukraine. Here's our chance to bleed them white, the way we tried to bleed the Russians white in Ukraine. I don't know if they will take that path or not, but it seems to me that's the dilemma they find themselves in.
Yeah. I'd like to actually focus this on Trump. Trump made a comment about 3 months ago saying British forces stayed off the front lines in Afghanistan. Now, as over 400 British servicemen perished there, that pissed a lot of people off on this side of the pond. Then about 2 weeks ago, he said, "You don't get for UK. You don't. When we win the war, you don't get to join in when the war's been won." Something to that. And now he's requesting that the British Navy and the French Navy get involved in patrolling the Strait of Hormuz, or sending them over to the Persian Gulf. I mean, does he think before he speaks? Because he's changing his mind almost by the hour. I mean, again, 36 hours ago, he was saying he was going to attack the power plants in Iran, and now he's walked that back. His head seems all over the place. What do you think, Alan? Do you think there's something cognitively going on with Trump? Because he does seem to be—he's like a pendulum, swinging back and forth. And
there's a lot of bluster. There's always been, though. That's nothing new with him. The art of the deal is you come in really hard, asking for 10 times what you really want to get, and then by the time you back down to where you end up, you're pretty much what you'd hoped for. That's kind of the technique. So a lot of people, but the thing is, that's not your normal diplomatic technique, and because it's so different, it can be unnerving. And but I think he does. It's too rapid. You know what I mean? Even like with the tariffs, in my opinion, you know what I mean? The tariffs are on, they're off, they're on. They start at a certain level. Again, it's another example of that. You come in with this really high tariff, knowing that you're going to back it down later, but using it as an incentive, right, to get what you ultimately want. But it's a technique that I've seen over and over again with him. I think in times of war, that's really unnerving, and I don't like it personally.
Nicolas, what do you think about Trump's state of mind? Do you think there's something going on there?
No, I felt the same way. I feel the same way, that it's really just classic Trump. So I really can't add more. I mean, I feel the same way. I share the same kind of criticism, like of the quickness, but I have not much beyond that. Like that is his style.
Yeah, I mean, isn't there something, an expression in the media, they call him taco or something like that? Because
he always tries out.
Yeah, and again, and that's supported when he ran. That scene where he was in Pennsylvania, and he was almost shot, and blood was trickling down his face, and you saw the American flag billowing in the background. That was a powerful scene, but I don't know. In the last 6 months, he is not acting the same as from what I've seen. I'm used to, he seems really confused. Balderson, what do you think about Trump's acumen, cognition? Is this the art of the deal, or is there something going on with him?
I think he's under an extreme amount of stress right now. I think it would be reasonable to assume he's having a hard time capacitying it. It's you get cognitive decline eventually, and he is definitely not a young man. That was one of the weirdest parts about this last election. You're talking about two very old men that you're choosing to lead the country and lead the world geopolitically. That's very odd. So it would be hard to imagine that he's not having some cognitive decline. But also, I think that the general propaganda in the United States is meant to confuse. I think we're really not supposed to know where we stand. You're not supposed to have a grip on things. I think that's been purposely done, and I think he just sticks with it. The guy's in the WWF Hall of Fame. I mean,
Keep them guessing.
yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, I gotta love the guy. I gotta love the guy. But when you say right in front of the Japanese prime minister that what about our attack on Iran? Well, hey, the Japanese know something about sneak attacks. I mean, that's golden. You gotta. But I do think the man, first off, he's under a lot of stress. There's no question about it. I think he is declining cognitively. He's sort of turning into Joe Biden in front of our eyes. And, I mean, you got Joe Biden, it's starting to look like, again, Brezhnev's Politburo with Chernenko and Kirilenko, all these geriatric cases in terms of who's running this country. He's also got to take into account that I think by all accounts, the Democrats are going to take the House of Reprehensibles in the fall, and that he is going to get impeached one way or the other. And frankly, if things go really, really bad, we could even be looking at a 25th Amendment scenario with people trying to remove him. That, remember, most of the Republicans in Congress really hate Donald Trump. I mean, look, Marco Rubio hates Donald Trump. Ted Cruz hates Donald Trump. They're all going along with him because they know he's got his populist base in the party. That's where the voters are, at least so far, at least most of the older ones. And but if they saw a chance to put a knife in his back, and they had good reason to do so and thought they could save their own political skins, they'll do it in a New York minute.
Old declining geriatric Trump runs circles around all these people. Nice.
He's not running circles. No, or what circles is he running? The thing he has is he has the.
They all wear his shoes. Did you see that? They were all wearing the shoes that he bought for them, and one of them's like bigger, like Rubio's. His pair was obviously bigger, and instead of saying, "You know what, Mr. President, thank you, but these are too big," he just wore them. Yeah, he's running circles around them.
Yeah, I mean, I think
he has the voters that they don't.
I haven't seen any real evidence. I haven't seen any real evidence of decline. He can talk for hours to the press off the cuff, no matter what. He can go for, the longest State of the Union on record. He can stand and talk for as long as people want to talk. He talks on Air Force One. He is always available, and he's, I think he's sharp. I think anybody with that kind of schedule would have some times when they're not sharp. But I haven't seen anyone really who can keep up with him. He's been a workhorse from day one. So, I think it's unfair to say that's decline. I mean, I think we need more proof than that. I mean, as far as making gaffes, he's not smooth. He's never been polished in terms of etiquette, the etiquette on the world stage. That's never been him. So I don't think that's evidence of decline. I think that's just who he is.
I wouldn't have said that the decline was severe like it was in the case of Biden. I wouldn't have said that. I wouldn't have said that. No.
Fair enough.
I agree that anybody would be horribly stressed out in this situation and having to run all the time, and they would all make gaffes. That's absolutely agreeable. I also think that it's unreasonable to imagine he's not in some sort of cognitive decline. His acumen is as sharp as it was 20 years ago.
Yeah,
if it's not evidence of cognitive decline, could it be evidence of just poor judgment? Evidence that he does not know what is going on?
No, it's just evidence of
what I mean by that is for the President of the United States to say, we don't need the UK Navy, we don't need the French Navy to be deployed to the Persian Gulf, and then a week later bitch about the UK Navy and the French Navy not being deployed and asking for the deployment. That's not how it's done.
They say all the time, they love to say all the time on the international stage, oh, the U.S. is our historic friend. Don't do the tariffs. What happened to our historic friend? Oh, don't do that, Mr. Trump. What happened? We're historic friends. We have a relationship. all of a sudden Trump's like, where are my historic friends? I love it. That's what's going on.
Well, he wants
Okay,
to show
we call NATO a defensive alliance. The US and Israel launched this attack against Iran. So there is no need for the UK and the French to be involved, as
But
they
the
were not
reason-
attacked by Iran.
Well, the reasoning is simply because the strait affects them more. You know, it
True.
affects the world, but it's like it's like in terms of like difference, it affects China and Europe more than the US. So when Trump calls on his historic friends and allies and he's like, where the heck are you guys? I think he's right about that.
Yeah,
It's
but
like-
I think he was.
It's
I
an
think he was also-
offensive move. You can't cry because other people don't want to go in imperialism with you. NATO was entirely defensive.
I think
But
he
they
was trying to actually reveal. He was uncovering where their head really is. Like, in other words, he's saying, look, look, we've been the power behind NATO. We have spent money on your defense like no country in the world has.
Mhm.
And in the time when we ask for it, you won't do it. Therefore, we've kind of identified where everybody stands now. It's out in the open. I think that's what he was
You
doing.
said the key word, defense. Defense.
Yes.
This isn't defense.
Well, whatever you want to call it. I'm just saying.
Well, no,
he-
not
he
whatever you want to
exposed
call
them.
it. They're two distinctly different things.
He
One
exposed
you're
them.
attacking
He
a
exposed.
sovereign
My point.
nation
My
that
point
doesn't-
is.
that doesn't attack you.
My point
And the
was
other
not.
one, you're helping somebody defend themselves from
I
your
get that.
sovereign nation being attacked.
What
They're
I'm
two
trying to
very
say
different
is
things.
he was trying to reveal where the loyalty is. He was trying to say that it's all one way. That's
do
what
you
I think.
imagine that had Iran come over and attacked the mainland United States, these other countries wouldn't have helped in the defense? Because it's two very different things. You're holding them to a standard that they did not agree to. They agreed to the defense standard. Now you're trying to hold them to an offense standard and saying they're not keeping up to their part. They didn't agree to it.
Yeah, I
point is
know
they
they didn't agree to it. This wasn't their war. I totally get that. I totally get that. But for there to be like no loyalty whatsoever when they do need the oil coming from the Strait of Hormuz, to act like, oh, well, it's all up to you. It's like, well, okay. You know, at least we know where you stand now.
Well, the UK, France, and other countries could just abide by the Iranian stipulations and buy it in the yuan, and that would
That's a great idea. Well, look, I mean,
Yeah.
what would the French and British fleet do? I mean, Trump, I'm sure, feels isolated to some extent. He would like the show of political support. But what are the French and the British fleet going to add to the U.S. Navy in opening the
true.
strait? Zero, nothing. Because the U.S.
So
Navy
he's
can't
right.
do it either.
So he's
So
right.
how are they gonna do it?
He was actually right. I think, and that's exactly the point. He wanted to show the unity of force. That was the whole point. So
Why-
he's right. He
why-
doesn't
why-
need them, but he
why-
wants their show of support. That's what I think is going on.
I mean,
But also
the
they did have a
UK,
very
the UK
different
is, sorry,
right?
Nick, just let me make this comment. The UK is allowing the US to launch bombing raids from Diego Garcia and the base on Cyprus. That is a level of support, isn't it?
It is. It is, but it didn't happen at first, did it?
Again, that goes to the point of defense and offense. They're two separate things. The UK didn't sign up for an attack against Iran, so we allowed British bombers to use the locations in the UK, Cyprus, Diego Garcia. I think British aircraft have been involved in the shooting down of missiles and drones in this time in the 12-day war last year. So we have been involved. Well, I say we. I don't want to be involved at all, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Nicolas, what were you going to say there?
Yeah, I think it was just a play to show whether there was unity or not. You know, to just put it out there so everybody knew.
But
everybody
but again, Alan, what do you mean by unity? Because there has been an involvement there in terms of the European powers. They just haven't participated in an offensive strike, and as we alluded to, they don't have the capability to take part in an offensive strike. So
I don't
why would
remember
you-
Europe helping with this war right now. What's going on right now?
What can
It's
they
all
do?
on the US.
What can I know? But what can they do? I mean, they could make a
Something.
show support. No, they can't do much at all. The European,
No, but they wouldn't. That's the
military
point.
are
They're
virtually
happy letting US do it. That's the point.
No, but there's nothing they could do even if they wanted to. What good are they?
No, but the point is that they're happy with this setup. They're happy with not having a what is it? Remember, Trump was telling them, "Hey, you guys got to bring up your payments or whatever, like how much they contribute to NATO and all that." Like they're happy with this setup. That's the point.
Mhm. Yeah, and we meet the 2% threshold, the requirement.
Oh,
And
who does?
I believe Trump wanted to raise it to 5%.
To defend Europe against,
you got to remember, like,
to defend Europe against what exactly? What is the military threat to Europe? What's this 5% supposed to defend Europe from exactly? There is no threat to Europe except the migrant crisis, and NATO is useless against that.
Well, if I may, I may not be the best to answer this, but like I was saying earlier, my view of Trump is he wants these institutions, America, the military, all these things to win. He has deep criticisms of them, but he doesn't necessarily disagree with their conclusion of the world stage and security standpoint and the great power rivalry. So it sounds like Russia and China, are they like zero? They're like, there's nothing. Let me ask you this. Let me put it like this. Is it realistic for you, the US, to just take on, like, suddenly adopt like a totally isolated position of the world? Would that be chaotic, or what am I not getting here?
I think you're drawing a false dichotomy between an isolated position in the world and our current position, which is seeking global domination. We don't have to do either one of those things. We can engage in the rest of the world without trying to dominate the rest of the world. Look, there is no military threat to Europe. There hasn't been since the Cold War ended in 1991. NATO should have been abolished right then. Instead, it embarked on an enlargement and then also a war of aggression in Yugoslavia. And then we mounted many of the same countries, not under the NATO umbrella, but still by NATO, against Libya in 2011. Some of the countries that participated in NATO were Britain, Spain, and many others. Not France and Germany, but others in the Iraq invasion. Again, NATO became an offensive platform, nothing to do with defense.
Tripping? Did Russia not invade or not? Am I tripping or what?
Yeah, Russia invaded after we overthrew the government in Kiev and turned Ukraine into a NATO state and everything but name to threaten Russia. No, would we put up with that in Canada or Mexico?
More dimensions to this. So you agree? There's maybe they're not total. Maybe they're not the Hitler of Russia and they need to be eradicated, but maybe there's some play there. There's something that Trump agrees with the U.S. State Department.
There's no complication here. We're the ones that aggressively tried to turn Ukraine into a platform against Russia. They responded. In fact, if you read the Brookings paper from a few years ago, we wanted that outcome. We wanted the Russians to come into Ukraine so we could bleed them white and bring down the Russian government. It was all part of a program that goes back years. It was a purely offensive action on our part.
Yeah, wasn't there a Rand Corporation report or something, a paper overextending Russia into?
I think it was Brookings extending Russia.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. It's the plan to carve Russia up into 4 or 5 countries.
Yeah,
that goes way back.
Yeah,
I personally don't think Trump wants that, but that is the history leading up to this. I mean. Yeah. NATO moved military equipment into Ukraine more and more and more. The deal was nothing. That Ukraine was supposed to be a buffer zone, not part of the USSR, never to be a part of NATO. They're supposed to be a buffer. And for, decade after decade, we meaning NATO, kept moving more and more equipment into. It would be like if China kept moving more and more equipment up into Mexico. At some point, we would go in. And that's what Russia did. I honestly don't blame Russia for going in. I think they were provoked, by the NATO policies.
We broke agreements that were made when the USSR fell apart. You can go back and watch Senator Biden giving a speech stating that peace will maintain with Russia as long as we don't enter the Baltic states. Well, then decades later, here we are entering those states and putting NATO in them, and Russia went to war. Well, you break the treaty, that's what happens.
Yeah, it was inevitable, I think.
Would you guys say that Russia and China they're just happy not being number one?
No, there's nothing to indicate that they want. Look, every country wants to be the best that it can be, right? I mean, I heard
that's all I'm getting.
On TV. Right about China's against America. They're trying to become the number 1 economy in the world. Right. What are they supposed to do? So we better not grow our economy. That might offend somebody. Of course, every country wants to be as great as it can, look out for its interests. However, it doesn't mean they share the same unholy drive for dominance over everybody that we've exhibited for 30 years.
And that's what I'm.
No.
Yeah, but then what about all the precursors for the drugs that they're supplying to weaken the country, to cause all the addiction, to cause all the drug trade here? You don't see China as an aggressive move on their part?
No, is this an aggressive move by the Chinese state or by Chinese companies to simply sell products to people who want to buy them? Is there an attempt that they want to do?
Well, the Chinese state can shut down any company. They could shut that down in a heartbeat if they wanted to.
What incentive did they have to do it? I mean, if they're waging war against
trade,
them,
well, how about not creating a mortal enemy? How about that? That'd be an incentive.
How about we actually negotiate all the issues that are on the table, starting with getting the hell out of Taiwan, which is part of China.
Yeah, we get out of Taiwan, and all of a sudden we have a mic.
Taiwan is part of China. We recognize it as part of China. If the Chinese were occupying a state of the United States and saying, "Oh, this is an area that we control, even though it's part of your country," would that be something hostile from our point of view?
I'd like to hear out the Taiwanese.
Yeah, me too. I wonder if they'd agree. I agree that they'd just be taken over when they've been free all that time. Sure, just take us over. We'll be part of your slave.
I'm sure that's what they want is two superpowers fighting over who controls them in their country. That's what every
that stinks too. But becoming part of the slave master wouldn't be too fun, I don't think.
Yeah.
Right, guys, I want to ask one last question in respect to this conflict in the Middle East. Where do you think we'll be in a month from now? Do you think the war will be ongoing? Do you think it will metastasize and get worse, or it will be negotiated to a conclusion?
I think it would get worse.
I think it would be one of the wonders of the eighth wonder of the world if that's solved in a month from now. I think it's going to keep going.
We finally agree on something.
Yeah, we probably agree on more than is obvious, I would say.
I gotta say, I really don't know. It's just that I know what I do know is that Trump, he's the kind of guy, he does not like losing. He doesn't like losing. So you know, I see it could go a number of ways. You could see it like he finds an off ramp and tries to get something out of it. Some might say he'll spin it into a win. I wouldn't say this. I wouldn't characterize it like that. But I would still say that would still be positive for the world. So one thing I will say is Trump doesn't like losing. So, and that includes like a quagmire and all the worst things the critics are saying. That's really all I know. I don't know how it'll be in a month.
That's a good point. He's got an incentive to try to end it because he doesn't want that. Yeah.
That's how I see Trump.
Balderson, what do you think?
I think they're already calling for more boots on the ground. I don't see a great way to back out of this and save any kind of face. It's definitely, I think in a month we're that much more embroiled into probably what's going to be a decade war.
That sounds ominous. I mean, the notion of striking Iranian power plants and the Iranian response that they would strike plants across the Gulf and desalination plants too. I mean, that's crazy. That was mad.
Yeah.
I'm glad he walked that back. Trump walked that back. But how long for? He's given them a 5-day reprieve, but again, the Iranians have responded.
If you guys have time, I would encourage you to go on Rumble. The Globalist Plan is my podcast. I interviewed a woman named Zalal Habibi, who is a member of the National Council of Resistance for Iran, NCRI. Her father was killed by the current Iranian regime when she was 7. And she has been working to be part of the organized resistance since then. And it's a fascinating interview. And you can see, she said that she doesn't think this war is, that this regime is going to change by force. She doesn't think it's possible. But, I'm wondering if Trump is working in any way with the National Council of Resistance of Iran as an alternative to the current regime, because they have a plan, an established plan for a regime change in Iran, a peaceful change, and to make Iran a secular country, even though she's a Muslim. They're talking about a secular Iran that's not run by a religious organization at the top. And if that's who they're negotiating with, and if there's some way to try to make that happen, I think that would be the best outcome for Iran, to get a secular regime. And this one, they've been working on it for. She's been part of this organization for over 25 years. It's a peaceful transition of power that they're all about. So yeah, you
Well,
can catch that at yeah.
Alan, the problem with that, sorry, is that if you want the people to rally to your cause, bombing their schools and their power plants isn't going to do it.
I agree, and she's saying that's not going to work. But I'm saying if you can create a true Iranian resistance from the inside, or if you can support the resistance, they're already the resistance, the National Council of Resistance of Iran. There's already a well-developed organization there, all right, with a whole policy planned out for a transition. I'm saying if that could happen, I think that would be the best solution. I think as long as Iran is run by a religious regime that I think is as unstable as you can get in terms of the region around them, I think that's a problem. But if you could get a secular country, that has a chance of being a stabilizing force. And I hope that they don't bomb any of the power plants or any of the infrastructure that they're going to need on the other side of this. So that would be my hope.
Yeah, and hopefully it doesn't metastasize, bringing other countries like Azerbaijan, Turkey into it, because they share borders with Russia, and then the whole thing just becomes a world war. Yeah. So hopefully,
I mean that plan's worked out well for us for the last 40 years, where we back rebels and that's and fund regime change. It's worked out great. And I mean,
these aren't rebels though. These aren't rebels. This is a peaceful thing. It's actually run by women. Or have the key positions.
Oh no!
Oh no! Yeah, that's
right, guys. Listen,
ruin the homes over here. How are they going to fix Iran? No, okay.
Guys, thanks for coming on the show, man. It's been spirited, and I've enjoyed it, and I've learned, quite a bit. So, Nicolas, Benjamin, Alan, and Jim, thanks for coming on.
Been a blast.
Pleasure, Vincent. Thank you.
Nice meeting you, gentlemen.
Same here, guys. Same here. Pleasure.
right.
Jim.
Well, again, that was an enjoyable, spirited debate, and I like the fact there was actually some difference in our positions. The last time we had a debate on the war, there was a kind of conformity to everyone's opinion. So yeah, I enjoyed that, and it was the first time we had Nicolas Gonzales on the show, so it was good to see him. The next episode we have is coming next week, and we'll be going down a different track with that one. It won't be on the war. Yeah, but if you enjoyed, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button. And if you really enjoyed, you can donate at Buy Me a Coffee, Caledonian Elixir / Buy Me a Coffee. The link is in the description. So just remember, people, it is a crazy, chaotic world out there, and there's a lot of people willingly trying to spread that chaos. So everybody be cool. You be cool.
Gold pressed platinum, slip strips and bars. If you ever find some, you can lose it in quarts. Get a Ractagino, spin the double wheel. Hold her a black hole, just depends how you feel. Yeah, it just depends how you feel. Gold pressed platinum, you know it's a gas. Mom vomits it up into a tiny little glass. Liquid platinum,